Shem Irgun Shir Torah, Mr. Boston. I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's shir, all the men and women of Matriach to come in person. Everyone is joining us on the phone and online. Bruchim Aboim. I'd like to give a big yeshakayach to co-sponsor of tonight's shir, Beilim Shem, as a schus v'atzlocha. Also like to give yeshakayach to the supporters of tonight's shir, Rosh Chaim Ulger, Lila Nishmas Berezer Moshe, Olav Shalom, and the Gutman and Newfield families, Lila Nishmas Gittel, Basher Moshe, Olav Shalom, and Rabbi Paysach Krohn, Lila Nishmas Aviv, Rabbi Shol Barameir, Olav Shalom. Rabbi say you can have the great schus of Rabbi's Torah, the Rabbim, Helk Irgun Shirei Torah, with the great expenses incurred for organizing all these shiurim by sponsoring a shir or giving a generous donation. Call Irgun Shirei Torah at 718-851-8651 or email tapecenter@yeshivanet.com for this great schus. Tonight we have the cover to have with us once again the noted Maggid, Rabbi Paysach Krohn, speaking on holding on to Emunah in difficult times. This is my cover to call on Rabbi Krohn for tonight's drasha.
It's a very great covet. I've been invited once again by Irgun Shirei Torah, specifically Rabbi Elazar Baruch Bald, who's probably one of the greatest Mabritzei Torah in the world today, organizing so many shiurim every day in the summer, throughout the winter, just absolutely incredible. And I know that he's very fortunate to have one of the most organized and efficient people, Rav Simcha Deutsch, and we appreciate the work that both of these young men do. It's wonderful. And they should mention they should be able to continue to be Marbitz Torah all over the world. And of course, they deserve our tremendous, tremendous support. We've come together in very, very difficult times. Of course, the video that's been focusing right now only on me, you cannot see that this crowd is only a third, at least maybe even less than what it usually is. And that's because of social distancing, and people are being very careful. So although this is my first speech where I'm appearing personally in front of a crowd, I've been doing Zoom till now, but I know that Rabbi Elazar Baruch is very, very careful with the crowds that come to all the different shiurim. So I want you to know throughout the world, wherever you are, that here in Brooklyn, they're keeping to the halachas of the government and what is maximum safety. And Bez Hashem will be able to continue this way until this COVID is over and we'll be able to get back to normal. We've come together in a very, very difficult times, especially here in Brooklyn. When COVID first started, we know that there was so much pain and so much suffering and so much illness and so many, many people, Rahman al-Islam, sitting Shiva. And many, many people, even today, a few months into this, where Baruch Hashem, a million times over in New York, it seems to have flattened out, and nobody's been dying the last couple days here in New York because of COVID. Baruch Hashem for that. We hope that it'll be that way in Florida, Arizona, California, and throughout the world. But it is a very scary time, and it's a frightening time, and it's a time of uncertainty, and we all feel that. And because of that, Rabbi Elazar Baruch and I decided that the right topic to talk about tonight is Emunah. Emunah in difficult times, and how to hold on to Emunah in difficult times. And I want to begin by telling you about a letter that the Imrei Emes wrote. The Imrei Emes, as many of you know, was the third Ger Rebbe. He lived in Poland and he was able to escape. He was able to get out of Poland, and he came to Eretz Yisrael. And after the war, the Ger Chassidim came over to the Heilige Rebbe and they said, Rebbe, we need chizuk. There's so many people who lost family members, fathers, mothers, children, Zaydis and Babas. Please give us strength. And so he wrote a letter. And he wrote a letter of strength and chizuk. But I want to quote one part of that letter because every single one of us knows this pasuk. We know it from Kindweis on. And you will see B'derech Drush how the Heilige Rebbe touched it and how it affects every single one of us. And he quoted the pasuk Vahi Erev Vahi Voiker Yom Echad. We know that's right, of course, in the beginning of Bereshis. And he wrote, and I'm translating in English, to our brothers in Klal Yisrael who have been spared the sword, wherever place you may be, the Rabbeinu Shalom should be with you. People of the Rabbeinu Shalom, be strong. And then he teaches this way. Vahi Erev. There are many, many people who go through Erev, which means darkness. And we know every one of us here has friends and relatives that went through terrible, terrible darkness in the last few months. And yet, Vahi Boiker. We know that in certain families, in general, there's much nachas and much simcha and much happiness. Maybe not necessarily through COVID, but in general in life. And sometimes we see in the same family, there's erev, there's difficulties. Certain mothers cannot dress their children the way they would want, and when they come to a bar mitzvah or a wedding, they're embarrassed because their nephews and nieces are being dressed so beautifully. So yet in the same family, you have the erev, the darkness, the husband is not making money, and he can't afford all the other things that his brother-in-law can afford. And then vahi voiker, you have that boiker, that happiness, and that light, and that sunshine. And the Rebbe said, just remember, Yom Echad, it all comes from that source of light, which is the Rabbeinu Shalom. Everything happens only because the Rabbeinu Shalom wants it. In the same family, 24/7, the Eibishter is watching and orchestrating every little thing that happens. So vahi erev, vahi voiker, it's all Yom Echad. And so sometimes when we go through a difficult time, and many, many people surely have asked themselves, if they haven't said it out, but they've thought about it, why me? Rabbeinu Shalom, I'm such a good person. I've done so much good. How could you make such a terrible thing happen to me? Are you allowed to ask such a question? Are you allowed to question HaKadosh Baruch Hu on that? And I'm telling you, I'm going to tell you now, Gemara, that I would never, ever have the courage to say myself unless I saw it in the Gemara, and you could look it up. And it's frightening. It's in Bava Basra, Daf Tezayin Amud Aleph. And Eov is talking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if the Heilige Chazal, Rabbeinu Rabashi, brought it down in the Gemara, that means that we have to learn something from it. Omar, Eov said, Rabbeinu Shalom, Shema Ruach Sa'ara Avra Lefanecha. What happened? A whirlwind came over you, you got mixed up? V'neschalev ben Eov la'oyev. Well, you don't know how to spell my name? I'm not oyev. I'm not an enemy of yours. I'm Eov. I'm your friend. How could you do this? So if the Gemara is telling us that Eov asked such a strong kasha, we could also ask that kasha. You'll see the teretz that the Eibishter gives in a minute. But the point is, you're allowed to ask, why me? Everybody's allowed to ask, why me? Because that's what Eov was saying. He said, my name is Eov, Aleph Yud Vav Beis. Not Oyev, Aleph Vav Yud Beis. So what happened? You got mixed up? Hashem, I'm your friend. How could you do this? So before I tell you what the Eibishter answered, I want to tell you a very tragic story that's not easy to listen to. But I want to tell it to you because we're going to learn a great lesson from it. You see, in my neighborhood where I live, in Kew Gardens, in 1996, the day before Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, it was a Shabbos. That year, Shiva Asar B'Tammuz went on a Sunday. And that Shabbos, there was a terrible fire in the home of Menashe Silbergleit. Menashe Silbergleit Nebuch, his daughter Chana Bela was burned, and she was killed right away in the fire. Mrs. Silbergleit's mother, the grandmother of Chana Bela, was Nebuch killed in the fire. And there was a third terrible victim, Masha Miriam. She was burned severely, and she was taken to the New York Cornell burn unit. I went to see her. They gave me permission to see her after a couple days. It was horrendous. You can't even describe it. What it was to see a little child burned so severely. And of course, everybody was davening for her. And Rachmana Litzlan, on Chol HaMoed Sukkos, she passed away. Now, on Chol HaMoed Sukkos, you're not allowed to give a hesped. You're not allowed to give a eulogy. But I'm telling you, when they brought in that little coffin, with everybody watching how they brought the coffin of that little girl up front, you didn't have to say anything. Everybody was crying and screaming. But there was one Rav who got up to say something. And this Rav, many of you have heard his name because he suffered terribly, terribly from COVID. And the Eibishter was matzel him. He was on the cover of Mishpacha magazine last week. And the Rabbi Zev Ginsburg, they added a name to him, Chaim. They thought he wasn't going to make it. But Baruch Hashem, he's fine. I wouldn't say he's 100%, but he's on the mend. But Rabbi Ginsburg had a daughter that was a friend of Masha Miriam. So he knew Masha Miriam. Masha Miriam used to come to his house because the daughters used to go to each other's house and play. And so he got up and he said he's not going to say a hesped. First of all, you couldn't say a hesped Chol Hamoed, and you didn't have to say a hesped on such a terrible tragedy. But he said he was going to say divrei chizuk. And he told over something that all of us are familiar with when we daven on Yom Kippur and we say the piyutim, the Asarei Harugim Malchus. And over there, on Musaf, when we talk about Rabbi Shmuel, how he was tortured, and the piyut writes, Sorfei Mala Tzoku B'mora, Sorfei Mala the Heilige Malachim, they cried out in bitterness, Zu Torah v'Zu Schara. This is how you treat Rabbi Shmuel? This is the Torah, and this is the reward? And listen what the Eibusher says to the Malachim. Im eshma koil acher. If I hear one more word, epoich esa oilam lamayim latoy v'voy. I'm going to bring back the world to emptiness. Sort of, Vilna Goyen asked the question, what kind of answer is that? Okay, say, Malachim, it's not your business. I have a reason. But this is an answer? It's a good question. Zu Torah v'Zu Schara, right? How could that happen? So that's what you say to the Malachim? You say one word, I'm going to bring back the world to Toya V'Voya. What does that mean? So the Vilna Gaon gave a fabulous mashal. And he gave a mashal about a king who wanted to have the most beautiful suit made. But the problem was that in his kingdom, the best tailor was a Yid. And he hated Yidden. But he had no choice, because if he wanted to have the best suit made, he had to call this Yid. So he calls the tailor, and he says, listen, I need such a gorgeous suit, like never was such a suit made before. And the tailor says, Your Honor, I'll be very happy to do it. Let me just measure you. I'll tell you what material I need, and I'll make the suit. And of course, he measures the king, and he comes back a few weeks later. The king had given him all the material that he asked for, and the king puts on the suit, and he looks like $1 million. He looks fabulous, and he makes a big party. Everybody's at the party admiring how great the king looks. Now, the wife of the king, the queen, she hated Yidden even more than the king did. So she goes over to her husband, and she says, Your Honor, you really do look great. There's no question. This suit is beautiful. But I want you to know that this Jewish tailor's a ganav. He robbed you. So what do you mean he robbed me? Do you know how much material you gave him? That's what she says to her husband. You gave him so much material. It's true, he made the suit, but the extra material that was so expensive, he cut it up and he kept it for himself. And the king looks back at the suit, and he sees, you know something? You're right, I didn't think of that. I gave him a lot of material. He calls over the tailor, who was also had been invited to the party, takes him over to the side. He said, Dubu, Aganif. He said, what are you talking about? He said, you're a robber. I gave you so much material. And you made this suit. It's not great. But where's all the other material? He says, Your Honor, let me show you something. Do me a favor. Let's go into the other room. Take off the suit. Put on your regular suit. And I want to show you something. But I need a scissors, a ruler, and a table. And he gets it for him. And the king watches how the tailor starts cutting up the suit. He says, what are you doing? He says, I want to show you something. And he shows him how the lapels were double stitched. And the belt line, everything was doubled and tripled, put in so that it looks so seamless and so perfect. And he says, what are you doing? You're ruining the suit. And then when he cuts up the whole suit, he says, now measure it. Measure it and you'll see every bit of material that I gave you is right there. He said, but now the suit is ruined. He said, it's true, but at least now you understand where it all came from. And that's what the Goyen said. That's what the Eibusher said. The Eibusher said to him, Halachim, you were not around when I started this world. If you say one more word, I'll bring you back to the beginning, and then you're going to understand. Because unless you were with me at the beginning of the world, and you understand the master plan, you can't understand it. And that's the answer that the Eibusher says to Eov. Take a look. Eov Lamed Ches Pasuk Daled. The Eibusher says to Eov, Where were you when I started the world? Hagid, you tell me, if you're so smart. And that's what the answer is. You know what the answer is? We don't live long enough. We don't know the master plan. Of course Hashem has a plan. But if you walk in the middle of the story, you can't start asking kashas. You come into the middle of a shir, and all of a sudden the Rebbe's saying a toisus or something, and you're asking a kashas. What are you asking? You walked in the middle. So if you walked in the middle, and you don't hang around to the end, so how are you going to know the Eibishter's plan? That's what the Eibishter said to Eiv. You're not around long enough. You weren't there in the beginning. And you know something? The Chavetz Chaim says a pshat that you could almost say is adorable. Listen to this. We say in Ashrei 3 times a day, Shemer Hashem es kol hayavov v'es kol harishayim yashmid. Shemer Hashem, the Eibishter, protects all who he loves, v'es kol harishayim, and all the rishayim yashmid, he gets rid of. Now imagine if a guy comes late, right? He walks into davening late. Listen what he hears. Es kol hayavov v'es kol harishayim yashmid. All who he loves and all the rishayim is wiping out. Excuse me, God, what are you doing? Excuse me, sir, you walked in late. You didn't hear the first part. Shemer Hashem es kol hayavov. And what happens if a guy dies early? Or if a guy leaves shul early? Listen what the guy who leaves early, what he hears. Shemer Hashem es kol hayavov v'es kol harishayim. The Eibishter takes care of all who he loves and all the rishayim. Hashem, what are you doing? Excuse me, sir, you died early. You didn't stick around to the end of the story. And that's what the answer is. What do we live, 70, 80, 90 years if we're lucky? But that's it. You can't know the whole story. And so therefore, when somebody wants to know why me, the answer is it's impossible to know. Sometimes we'll be able to figure it out, as you'll see in a moment. Sometimes we'll be, but most of the time, we're not around for the whole story. That's what the Eibishter is saying to Eiv. I understand that you're upset. I understand that you're my friend. But I've got a master plan, but you weren't there from the beginning, and you're not around till the end, so how could you know? And that's what Emunah is all about. Emunah is that Hashem knows what he's doing. Sometimes we can understand what he's doing, but sometimes we can't. And I'll tell you a very painful story that happened with me. Those of you who know me personally know that when I was 21, my father was Shalom passed away. He was only 47. Now, when you're 21, so you think 47 is an old man. But most of us sitting here and most of us watching, no, 47 is pretty young, right? So, but my father had learned in Yisrael in Baltimore. And when he learned in Yisrael, Rav Schwab was a Rebbe there. Rav Schwab was a Rebbe in Yisrael together with Rav Ruderman before he came to Washington Heights. And my father loved Rav Schwab, and they were friendly. So when my father was in the hospital near Washington Heights, my brother Rav Kalman and I, we stayed by Rav Schwab for Shabbos. So after Musaf, my brother and I, we walked to the hospital, and then we came back to eat the Suda with Rav Schwab and his Rebbetzin. And Rav Schwab says to me, Nusa, how's your father? So I said, I have betachon that he'll be well. And he got very strict with me. And he said something to me that was so shocking and so frightening, but he taught me a lesson for life. He said, betachon does not mean that your father's going to get well. Imagine I'm 21. I know that if my father dies, I'm going to have to leave the yeshiva, have to support my mother, my 6 younger brothers and sisters, and I'm hoping that he's going to make it. And Rav Schwab is telling me, betachon doesn't mean that your father's going to get well. He said, betachon means that the Eibishter has a master plan, and that hopefully one day you'll be able to understand it. And he taught me a very important lesson in life. Anybody who says bad things don't happen is crazy. Somebody loses a spouse. Somebody loses a child, Rahman al-Islam. These are terrible, terrible things. When Mashiach comes, at the end of time, we'll have to understand. Then Hashem will explain to us why it had to happen. Then we'll understand what the good is. But right now, it's horrendous. You can't go tell somebody who's sitting Shiva, oh, it's all for the good. The guy will say to you, Mitzvah Bayu. What kind of answer is that? What kind of talk is that? That's insensitive to talk like that. Of course, terrible things happen. And when a person understands Emunah means that Hashem knows what he's doing. And one day we'll understand it. And of course, many times we go through terrible situations. Somebody loses a job. And he's frantic. How's he ever going to make parnosa? And then 3 weeks later, he gets an offer and he's getting a job that's 10 times better than the one that he had. Or sometimes a guy loses the house that he wanted to buy. He thought this was the greatest area. But what happens? It doesn't go through and he's devastated. His wife is devastated. And they move to another area and that's where they find the shidduch for their 4 daughters. In the next area. And they find the greatest rov in the next area. So then we understand why the first thing had to happen. The negative happened because that was a buildup. Because then the Eibishter was going to give us the good. And that's what Rav Schwab is saying. B'tochen doesn't mean that everything that happens is good. We'll understand at the end of time why it had to happen. But b'tochen means that Hashem has a master plan. And that's what Emunah is all about. And if that's the case, how do we hold on to the Emunah? And Rav Schwab brings the Zohar HaKodesh, and he says something fabulous. And it's something that we could all start doing from tonight. When we say Krishma either Alamita, or those of us who haven't done Ma'ariv yet. Listen to what Rav Schwab brings from a Zohar Chodesh. When he writes like this. The Zohar Chodesh is in Rus. Asfasa lebarnash. The medication or the remedy for a person, the high alma, b'chol yema. You want to have the remedy that's going to carry you through the day, every day. That's the man dekora krishma. The one who lanes krishma al tikuna the way you're supposed to. Now I want to show you how you're supposed to lane krishma. I want to show you something, maybe you never thought about this. Let's watch these words, and then Rav Schwab writes about saying it out loud so that it goes into your heart and you understand it. We know that Hashem has different names, and the different names of Hashem symbolize different things. When we use the word Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, that's the Hashem of Chesed. When we use the name Elokeinu or Elokim, that's the Hashem of Mishpat. Now watch this. Shema Yisrael. We're talking to Klal Yisrael. Hashem. Hashem who gives you all the chesed, who gave you your wife, who gave you your house, who gave you your kids, who gave you your job, who gave you your grandchildren and great-grandchildren. That's Hashem. Elokeinu. The judge. The one who maybe caused you to lose the job. Or the one who brought COVID. Or the one who did things that you felt were difficult in this world. So Shema Yisrael, there's Hashem and there's Elokeinu, but just remember, Hashem Echad. It's all good. Eventually we're going to find out that it's all good. And that's the medication. That's the remedy. If we could only say Shema in that way every time you think about it, forget about when the chazan finishes, who cares? You're talking to Hashem. You're talking to yourself. You're using that remedy that the Zohar says. Just remember Hashem, all of us have good. Every single one of us here has good. And every single one of us has difficulties. That's what Golus is all about. Nobody gets away free. Hashem, Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. One day we're going to figure it out. One day he's going to explain it, why it all had to happen. And that's the remedy. And then he says something that is absolutely unbelievable. I never thought about it until I saw it in this great sefer, which is called Rav Schwab on Prayer. You must get that sefer. Listen to what he says. How many words in the pasuk Shema? Shema, Yisrael, Hashem, Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. 6 words. That's a deraisa. Midrabanan, we know that we say Baruch Shem. How many words? Baruch Shem, Kavod, Malchusa, Li'elam, Voed. How do you like that? 6 words in Shema, 6 words in Baruch Shem. He says, you know what that is? That's the Orei Miklot. That's the cities of sanctuary. There were 12 cities of Orei Miklot. And that's what Shema is to you. When you say Shema, you're enwrapped and you're protected by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because that's your Orei Miklot. When you say the Shema, it makes you feel comfortable because, of course, there's Hashem and there's Elokeinu, but there's Hashem Echad. That's the Orei Miklot. And then he says, unbelievable. How many words in Shema altogether? 42. How many cities were there of the Levim in Eretz Yisrael? 42. Each one was an Orei Miklot. So it's not only the 6 words of Shema and the 6 words of Baruch Shem that are in Orei Miklot, but the 42 words of Shema. That's the same Orei Miklot. Let's read the Shema every time that we say it. And let's think about that it's protecting us. It's giving us the remedy. It's giving us the answer that Hashem echad. That's how it's going to be. Vay Hashem l'melech al kol haaretz. V'yemuhu Hashem echad u'shmaya echad. That's what it means. That we can't know the answer. And that's why we struggle. And that's why we have such a beautiful get-together that's being seen literally around the world. Why? To give all the brothers and sisters in Klal Yisrael chizuk. To know that Hashem loves us and that He's got a master plan. And just like we made it through all the shirek, l'chashrek, l'chatzaras of the past, we're going to make it. We're going to make it. And next year there'll be hundreds of people here like there always are. And it's sooner than later. We just have to daven every day. Daven every day. And that's what Emunah is all about. And you know something? Today, I don't have to tell you. There are fabulous, fabulous svarim on Emunah. Rab Shalom Arush wrote a sefer that sold over 1 million copies called The Garden of Emunah. We know that Rab David Ashir, young Sfarish Talmud Chacham, has written now Living Emunah. It's now 5 volumes. It's incredible. They've sold over 150,000. Art Scroll sold already of all the Living Emunah books. It's amazing. And that's what we have to read. You have to read these kind of books. Don't be embarrassed. Have a Seder with your spouse. Have a Seder with your kids. Every night, read one story in Living Emunah and discuss it. And you'll see he brings psukim and he brings chazal. But there's something that I want to tell you about, a 3rd and a 4th book on Emunah. Fabulous. A couple years ago, I was in Eretz Yisrael, and somebody asked me to go meet a woman called Risa Rotman. I never heard of her. And my friend Menachem Nissel said to me, "You know who she is?" I said, "I know who she is." "Yeah, you just don't know her personally, but you know in a second. I'll tell you who she is." He says, "Do you remember that terrible morning in Harnof when those 4 tzaddikim Nebuch were axed and killed in the most brutal way?" Her husband Chaim was the 5th, except he didn't die right away. He was in a hospital. He was in a coma for a year. And, you know, like everything else, after a while you forget the tragedies, either because there's new things or because we get involved and we forget. It's hard to imagine that we're going to ever forget COVID, but you'll see when the Mets are in the World Series, we will not be talking about COVID. But, you know, people do forget. But the point is, what happened over there was that people forgot, but she didn't forget. I met her in her apartment in Hanof, and she told me she was writing a book, and she wanted that I should give her a title for the book because she knew that I write for Art Scroll. I gave her a title, but Art Scroll had a better title. And the title that Art Scroll used is Terah and Emunah in Hanof. And in there, on page 254, she writes something that is absolutely fabulous. You would think a great mashgiach wrote it. And she told me why she wrote it. She said, throughout the year, people kept asking her, "Are you in limbo?" Limbo means like, are you hanging in the air just waiting for something to happen? Listen to what she writes. No, there's no such thing as limbo. Jews are never in limbo. Whether they are waiting for a shidduch, or they're waiting for a baby, or any other Yeshua salvation, they are exactly in the place they are meant to be to do their avodas Hashem. This is the place where I am meant to be at this time to serve Hashem, and that is true for all Jews at any time or any place in their journey. And that's a very important lesson. That's a very important lesson, that right now when we are here in the middle of this COVID situation, this is exactly where the Eibishter wants us. And as we're going to talk in a few moments, life is a test. And Hashem is testing every single one of us. And that's what the COVID situation is all about. How do we react? Do we still consider Hashem close with Emunah and davening and mitzvahs? Or do we say, listen, if such a thing could happen, I'm out of here? No, a Yid is not in limbo. Things don't happen just stam in the Welterrein. Every moment is exactly where the Eibishter wants you to be. And that's the lesson. And I'll tell you something. So we have to learn tonight, how do we hold on to the Emunah? How are you machazik yourself in difficult times? And once again, we come to Rav Schwab. And Rav Schwab teaches us a very fascinating lesson, what happened by Yosef. We all remember the story. Yosef's in jail, and the Sarah Mashkim and the Sarah Oifim are there, and they have a dream, and he interprets the dream. And listen to what he says. He says to the Saramashkim, Ki im zachartani itcho kasher yitavloch. If only you would think of me, just remember me. When Paray, I'm telling you, you're going to make it, because that's what your dream is all about. Vasisi no imadi chesed, do a favor for me, because I interpreted your dream and I'm telling you, you're going to make it. Viskartani el Paray, you remember me to Paray, v'hoteisani min habayis hazeh, and you'll take me out of this place. And Yosef got punished. You know why, Dr. Schwab? Because that's not what he was supposed to say. He was supposed to say, you'll remember me, you're supposed to make ishtadlus. Everybody's supposed to make ishtadlus. But he should have said, V'hiskartani el Paroi, you'll remember me to Paroi, v'hitzesi Elokim min habayis hazeh. The Eivishter will take me out, not you. Remember me. Say a good word, and then Hashem will take me out. And that's how you hold on to the Emunah. Everything that happens, Baruch Hashem. Hoidul Hashem. And that has to be, Baruch Hashem, you come home, Baruch Hashem, your family is there, your kids are there, your wife is there, Baruch Hashem. Say Baruch Hashem 100 times a day. Every little thing that happens, you thank Hashem, you talk to Hashem, you make a good business deal, Baruch Hashem. Even if nobody's in the office, you're on the phone, the guy hung up, you look up and you say, Hashem, thank you. Baruch Hashem, that's what it's all about. And I'll tell you something. You know, there's a very big Talmud Chacham here in Brooklyn who's a Talmud of Rav Mordechai Schwab. And he once told me this story. He used to go visit Rav Schwab, Rav Mordechai Schwab, the brother of Rav Shimon. He used to visit him in Monsey every Chol HaMoed. And the last Chol HaMoed of his life, of Rav Mordechai Schwab, he was very, very sick. And the family called this Talmud Chacham and they said, listen, maybe you don't want to come this year because your Rebbe is so pale and frail, you're going to be frightened by what he looks like. He says, no, I still want to see him. And he told me that Adarabba, because if they told him this might be the last time, he definitely wants to go see Rav Mordechai Schwab. But he told me that as soon as he walked in and he saw Rav Schwab lying in bed, so pale and so frail, because don't forget this was Sukkot, and he hadn't seen him in 6 months from Rabbi Paysach. He was so shocked. And Rav Mordechai Schwab realized that. And he said to him, Zolz wissen, ich lebe b'simcha. I'm living in happiness. And he said, Zolz wissen, I couldn't go to Shul Yom Kippur. I wanted to daven in Shul Yom Kippur, but I couldn't go. But I was still happy. You know why? Because I didn't make myself sick. Hashem made me sick. And if Hashem made me sick, that I couldn't go to Shul, listen to what he said. He said, Ich leb chayim b'rtzoynoi. Could you imagine how he touched the words? Ich leb mit sein Willen. The way he wants me. He says, I can't learn anymore because I get headaches. You don't think I want to learn? But I'm okay. You know why I'm okay? Because I didn't give myself the headache. The Eibishter gave me the headache. And if he gave me the headache, he knew very well that I wouldn't be able to learn. And if that's what he wants, I'm okay with that. What an attitude. What an attitude. Chayim b'tzarnei, I'm living the way you want me to live. I didn't make myself sick. You made me sick and I can't go to shul. So if that's what you want, I'm okay with that. Ich leb b'simcha. That's an amazing attitude. Not that a person is complaining, Hashem, why'd you do this? Whatever you had a reason. I trust you. That's what Emunah is all about. And I'm going to live with it. And I'm going to manage. I'm going to manage the best that I can. Because if that's what you want, I'm okay with that. That's what Emunah is all about. And I'll tell you something amazing. There's a great Rav, Rabbi Yamin Eisenberger. Everybody who knows him loves him. Tremendous, tremendous person. And he once told me about a girl that was crying day and night. And the father begged Rabbi Yamin to speak to her. He doesn't usually speak to women, but this man pleaded, please, my daughter doesn't stop crying. So he told me what the daughter spoke to him about. It is so amazing. A heilige Tochter and Klal. So listen to this. This girl had cancer. And now she was in remission. And she said to Rabbi Yamin, she said, Rebbe, when I was so sick, I davened every day to Hashem. I spoke to Hashem all day. I felt so close to Hashem. But now that I'm in remission, I don't talk to Hashem the way I did. I don't feel that close anymore. And I feel terrible because I want to feel close. Imagine the helikite of a Bas Yisrael. She doesn't want to be sick, but she wants to feel that connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And she said, when I was so sick, I davened, I felt so close, I was talking to Hashem all day. So he told her whatever he told her. But I told him, if I was there, what I would have told this girl is that life is a test. The Eibusher tests you in the good times, and he tests you in the bad times. And Rebbe Tziyungrai Salah Shalom, she wrote just such a book called Life is a Test. And I want to tell you now something so amazing. Again, if you didn't see it inside, you absolutely would not believe it. There's a wonderful sefer called Shimusha Shel Torah. Shimusha Shel Torah was written by the grandson of Rav Lezer Shach, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha. The grandson is Rav Usher Bergman. And he was always by his Zayder Rav Shach, and Rav Shach told him many stories about many different Gedolim. And he wrote down all the stories, and he printed them in this book, Shimusha Shel Torah. So he has a whole section on Rab Chaim Soloveitchik. So he writes that somebody once came over to Rab Chaim in Brisk and said, you know, there's a wealthy guy, he lost all his money. How come Hashem made him lose all his money? So Rab Chaim said, I'll tell you why. He said, I'll give you a mashal. Imagine a father gives a little child a very sharp knife to play with. Well, if the kid is not careful, he's going to cut himself. And the kid did cut himself, and the father took the knife away. And Rab Chaim said, money for some people is very dangerous. And this person who had the money, he did not act appropriately. And so therefore, that was like the sharp knife. He had money. He should have done stuff with the money, but he didn't. And so Hashem took it away. It's like a sharp knife. So, of course, they asked Rab Chaim, yeah, but what about this fellow? And they mentioned the name. And I don't want to say the name of the person, even though it's in the Sefer, because we all know people by that name. So I don't want it to be Chas V'Shalom and her on those people. But they said, this guy, he was the biggest stuck in town in Brisk. Purim was like a circus in his house. Everybody came. How come he lost his money? Listen to the terrace that Rab Chaim Soloveitchik gave. You wouldn't believe it. I wouldn't believe it unless I saw it inside. And it's on page, I'm going to tell you exactly what page it's on so that you could look it up yourself. It's on page, I think, 201. You have to see it. It's just unbelievable. And he says like this. He says, life is like a university. What does that mean? He says, a father sends a son to college, and he passes the first semester. It's very difficult. But what happens at the end of the semester? He has to send him to the next course. So even though he passed the first course, it's got no bearing on the second course. He's got to still take that second course. And he said the Eibusher gave that fellow the course of wealth, and he passed it. Now he's giving him the course of poverty, and he's being tested. It's not that the Eibusher doesn't like him, but life is a test. Life is a university. What an expression. Who would believe that from Rab Chaim Soloveitchik? But you take a look at Shimusha Shel Torah, you'll see that's exactly what he says. It's absolutely incredible. That life is a university, and therefore you have to be able to pass every single course. And between me and you, of course, nobody can say why COVID came, unless you're a Navi. But I'll tell you one thing. We went through a lot of wealth here in America, all of us, every single one of us. We had a great life until Purim time, right? Baruch Hashem, there were many, many people that were doing very well, and generally speaking. And maybe we did pass that test of wealth. And now we're being tested. How do you do it when you can't come to shul? How do you do it when you can't get your kid to school or to yeshiva? Are you learning with him? Are you davening with him? Are you making sure that you're doing all the mitzvahs the way you're supposed to, even in the difficult times? Baruch Hashem, 1,000,000 times over. It's not the concentration camps. Nobody's killing us in the streets. It's difficult. There's no question. It's a test. And maybe that's what it's all about. It's a test, the university test. We go through the course of wealth and we passed it, and now we're going through this course. And Mitzvah Hashem will pass this, and then we'll go back to the regular way of life. But life is a test, and the Eibusher is testing us. So how do we do it? How do we maintain the Emunah? So I want to tell you about a wonderful book. It's a sefer, really. It's in English. A fellow, Yisrael Greenwald, wrote it. And I'll tell you the truth, I have a whole section in my house on Svarim on Emunah. I don't think I ever looked at that sefer until I was preparing this talk. And I opened up the cover and I saw that he gave it to me. I don't even remember when he gave it to me. And he's in Australia now. I was in Australia twice. So obviously he gave it to me, and I called him today to thank him. I said, when did you and I meet? He said, the last time you were here, I gave you the sefer. I said, I want you to know, of all the Svarim and Emunah, your sefer was fabulous. And I gave him the link, so I hope he's watching. It's 14 hours ahead. It might be in the middle of the night over there already. But the point is, he wrote a sefer also on Rav Mendel Kaplan. That's, those of you who know the Art Scroll book on Rav Mendel Kaplan, it's the same Rabbi Yisrael Greenwald. And he tells a fabulous story in there. It's mamish to cry. He said Rabbi Yerucham, when he was a young man, Rabbi Yerucham Levovitz, he was a philosopher, he was a thinker. And he was so nervous because he was having Shilas and Emunah. And he had all these questions and he was going crazy. And then he went to Rabbi Naftali Amsterdam, who was one of the Talmidim of Rabbi Sosalanta. And he said, Rebbe, help me, what should I do? I have Shilas and Emunah. And I don't want to have these Shilas. He was crying. And listen what Rabbi Naftali Amsterdam told him. And he said to him like this, you want to build up your Emunah? I'll tell you what to do. Learn Chumash and Rashi. He said, not Chovis Alvavas and not Moyer Nevuchim, just Chumash and Rashi every week. And Rashi will give you the Yesodais of Emunah. And maybe that's what we should do. Maybe that's what we should do. When was the last time any of us went through a parsha, even part of the parsha, with Chumash and Rashi? And I'll tell you what to do. Start from Revi, because everybody knows from the beginning to the middle, right? Start from Revi and go to the end. And you'll pick up Rashis and write them down and underline them. And then you're going to see Yesodais and Emunah. That's what Rab Naftali Amsterdam told Rabbi Yerucham. And you know what Rab Mendel said? Rab Mendel told this Rabbi Yisrael. He said Rabbi Yerucham, when he heard that from Naftali Amsterdam, he went out, he bought a set of Chamashim. He always used this set of Chamashim, even in his days in Mir, wherever he was. And the pages were falling out and tattered and torn, but he loved that set of Chamashim. And he always used it. And he felt that that's what gave him his Emunah. And maybe we should decide every day, let's learn a couple of psukim of Chumash and Rashi. And let's see what Rashi's talking about. And today there are wonderful, wonderful svarim, even in English as well, to bring out what Rashi's teaching us. That's one way of keeping on to the Emunah. You know, there's another way that he brings, which is absolutely fabulous. And he told me, I spoke to him today, I told you I called Australia. And in the book he writes that he heard it from Abdon Segel. Now, if you take a look in the Mishnah Berurah, Siman Reish Nun in Orach Chaim, Hilchos Shabbos, Mishnah Berurah Sif Cotton Beis, it tells us that when you buy something for Shabbos, you're supposed to say, L'Kavod Shabbos Kodesh. Now, every time that you say L'Kavod Shabbos Kodesh, listen what the Mishnah Berurah writes. Ki hadibur hu poyel harbe b'kedusha. I want to repeat it. Ki hadibur hu poyel harbe b'kedusha. When you do something and you say something, you physically bring that thought lamaisa. You might think you're cleaning the house for Shabbos, but if you say it, there's an element of kedusha. Because the thought became something tangible, a word. And that's why you have to be so careful. You're doing whatever you're doing, L'Kavod Shabbos Kodesh. Say it, L'Kavod Shabbos Kodesh. You're putting on a fresh suit, a fresh shirt, or whatever. Whatever you're doing, L'Kavod Shabbos Kodesh. And then you begin to feel the Heiligkeit of Shabbos because you're always saying L'Kavod Shabbos Kodesh. And we've all been by people who eat a special food on Shabbos or whatever, L'Kavod Shabbos Kodesh. It's beautiful. It makes it real. And that's what he says you should do with Emunah. Everything that happens to you in life, thank you, Hashem. Thank you. It couldn't have happened without you. I thank you so much. You made a deal. You drove someplace and everything was fine. You came early someplace. Whatever, talk to Hashem. Of course, we think, Hashem, thank you very much. But if you say it, you say it, Ki adibur hu poyel harbe b'kedusha. And he brings a wonderful example. And I brought a gift for all of you tonight. Because I want you to take this home and start doing this. And I'm going to tell you a little story. You know, I have a very dear friend, Chaim Abaton. He's a wonderful, wonderful doctor. And when his father was Shalom, who was a Rav in Long Beach, he had learned in Ponevezh, but when his father died, of course, I went to be Menachem Abel Chaim. I'm very friendly with him. And he said, you know, I want to do something L'zecha Nishmas, my father. I said, you're right, we got to do something. And we came up with some ideas. Whatever idea we came up with, he wasn't satisfied. Then one day, he came up with this idea. Listen to this. State beferish in halacha that before you take a medicine, or even if you take a vitamin, or even if you're going to go through a medical procedure, there's a certain yiratzan you're supposed to say. Yiratzan milfanecha Hashem alakai sheyeh esek zeh li l'refuah. Hashem, help me that this should cure me, ki roifei chinam ata, because you're the free healer. And then when you finish, you say, Baruch roifei cholim. He said, you know what? I'm going to make cards. And I'm going to give it out to everyone. And you take it out and give it out at the drushes. And I'm going to keep it on my desk in his office. And he said he's going to give it out to everyone. And, you know, he told me, Chaim Abaton, told me a great thing. You know, he's got a lot of Goyshe clients as well. He does colonoscopies and, you know, other things. So he said, he called Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky. He said, you know, I have this card, and I have it in Hebrew and English. As you see, I'm going to give it out to you right afterwards. And everybody can take it, as many as you need. Put it up on your refrigerator, whatever, keep it. Obviously, you can't put it in the bathroom, even though your medicine chest is there, because it has Hashem's name there. But the idea is, he asked Rav Shmuel, should I tell my Goyish clients before I do a procedure on them that they should say this even in English? And he said, of course. Because a guy also has to believe in Hashem, right? So therefore, let him know that you're just a shliach. It's not in your hands, it's in Hashem's hands. That's a beautiful thing. That's what Rav Shmuel told him. Again, the mere fact that you're taking the medicine, that's one thing. But here, ki hadibor, who poyal harbe bekedushin, now the medicine is a helik azach. You took some medicine, but you made it helik. And you connected to Hashem because you're saying, this is my Emunah. Hashem, I trust you. You're going to make me healthy. And this is the way to do it. So I'm making my ishtadlas, but it's you, because you're the roifei chinam. And that's a way, another way, besides learning Chumash and Rashi, and besides saying Baruch Hashem, and besides saying Shema Yisrael, as we said, and understanding it that way. That's how you hold on to the Emunah. And I'll tell you two more things. I believe one of the most important brachas that we have that can bring us Emunah is Ashiyata. I have spoken about this so many times that when you say Ashiyata, stand in one place. Stand in one place. How long does it take? 9 seconds? You know, the other day I had to give a shmuz in Zoom to Chevra and Yisrael. And we were speaking about the human body. And I told them that I once heard something from Rabbi Tatz, Zol Zayin Gesund, a brilliant, brilliant person. And he said in Hebrew, the word or, ayin vav resh, means skin. But it also, it's the same letters as iver, ayin vav resh, blind. So he said, why is it that in Hebrew the word blind is the same word as the word skin, skin and blind? Why? He says, you know why? Because the skin blinds you to what's going on. You can't see what's doing in somebody's heart and somebody's colon and somebody's spleen because the skin is blinding you. That's interesting. And then it occurred to me in English, how do you say skin? There's another way to say it. Anybody know? Hide, right? Isn't that interesting? Hide. It's called skin. It also hides what's going on in the body. So if that's the case, when do we ever thank Hashem for the whole circulatory system and for the whole digestive system? We take it for granted. But when you say Ashiyata, you stop. You stand in one place. And you know something, what the Vilna Gaon says? You take a look in the Siddur Bia Hagra, you won't believe it. The Bia Hagra and Ashiyata says, this is the only bracha, not Shofar, not Megillah, not Sittis, nothing, that we mention Kisei Kevadecha. Kisei Kevadecha, the heiligste Platz in the Welt. The Kisei, will all of you do it for the Kisei Kevadecha? How can we say that in Ashiyata, of all places? And the Vilna Gaon writes, he says, you know why? Because we have to know. שהקודש ברוך הוא שישגיח על עולם השופר לקח אנו עומדים שאפילו לפני כיסא כבודך שאפילו המלוכים הגבוהים עומדים כמה ריבי רבובויס that The Eibishter takes care of us, even from up there, on these mundane things which are even embarrassing to talk about. But you say Ashiyata numerous times a day or at night, and you stand in one place and you think about it. That'll bring you to Emunah. That'll bring you to Hakaras HaTov, that you're alive, especially in this time, and that everything is functioning. And if you want to have Emunah, we learn Chumash and Rashi, and we say Shema Yisrael, and we think about Hashem, and Elokeinu, and Hashem Echad. And you say Ashiyata. And every time something good happens, you thank Hashem. And I'll tell you two more things. You know, many, many people know this, but I'm going to add something to this. We know that the Brisker of Rav Velvel, he learned this from his father, Rab Chaim, that when he was in a jam, he would say, Einoid Movadai. I'm telling you it works. You're in a jam, you don't know how you're going to get out of it, just close your eyes and just say, Ein Oid Movadai. Say it quietly. You'll see you're going to make it. Ein Oid Movadai. That's the greatest level of Emunah, that Eibush, that's only up to you. And you know, he has this in his Sefer, Rabbi Greenwald. I can't get over it. There was a person known as the Bas Ayin, Rabbi Avram Doiv. He was a Talmud of Rabbi Nachum Chernovla. And he lived in Ukraine, and then eventually decided to move to Tzfas. And he came to Tzfas. He was the head of the Chassidisha Kehillah in Tzfas. And thousands of people, I just saw pictures, Rabbi Melech Biederman goes there on his yard site. And they prava over there, tremendous. They say it's a place where moisim happen. And you know what he said? When a person is in a jam, you should take a candy or a glass of water and make the bracha shahakoil niya b'dvarei. Everything that happens, only because of him. So that's the same type of thing as Einod Movadai. Either you say Einod Movadai, or like the Bas Ayin says, you say shahakoil niya b'dvarei. Again, it's the same idea. That's what Emunah is all about. I just want to tell you, there's one more way that I believe that we can hold on to Emunah. And that is by telling each other and by listening to stories of Hashgacha Pratis. When you hear stories of Hashgacha Pratis and you see how the Eibishter orchestrates the world, you just stand back in awe and you say, I know, this is Rabbeinu Shalom right here. And I'm going to tell you a couple stories of Hashgacha Pratis. Tell them over. Read other books of Hashgacha Pratis. And I'm telling you, it's absolutely amazing. I'll tell you this story. You know, we just know that Rab David Trenk never passed away a little over a year ago. His yahrzeit was just a few weeks ago. So his wife, Leah, is my cousin. So she once told me a story, amazing story. In 1971, she was in a taxi. And she's sitting in the back, and all of a sudden she turns around and she sees on the back there's a Gemara. And she takes a look at the name of the cab driver. He's like a Pakistani. Like he's probably not learning Gemara. And she says to him, excuse me, is this your book? He says, no, somebody was in my car this morning and he left it here by mistake. So she said, well, do you mind if I take it? Because I could probably find out, you know, who it belongs to. He says, please take it. I don't know who was in my car this morning. I have no way of knowing. And she took the Gemara home and she brought it to her husband, Rab David, Olav Shalom. And she said to him, you know, this is a Masechta Yavamas. Are they learning Yavamas in Mir? Maybe somebody from Mir was in the cab this morning. He said, no, we haven't learned Yavamas in years there. It's not, can't be here. So she asked him if he would call some of the yeshivas around Brooklyn and find out maybe somebody's learning Yavamas, and then we could go there and bring the Gemara and find it. But they were learning Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, whatever. But nobody was learning Yavamas. So they decided, okay, they have to hold on to it. There was no name in it. There was no simonim. A few months later, David Trenk is learning in the yeshiva in Mir. And a guy, a mathematician who he knew, comes in. He says to him, David, you know, I have time in the afternoon. I'd like to make a seder with somebody. You have anybody here who would like to make a seder with a balabas in the afternoon? He says, yeah, Grada, there's another guy who came in a couple days ago. And he's a balabas. He also, you know, would like to learn in the afternoon. Come, let's go. You know, let me introduce you to him. And as they're walking, he goes over, he says to the guy who he's walking with, he says, by the way, what do you want to learn? He says, well, I'd love to learn Yevamos. So he says, well, do you have a Gemara, Yevamos? He said, you're not going to believe this. A couple months ago, we were moving, and I had to go to my new house with a taxi, and I had this most gorgeous Gemara Yevamos, and I left it in the taxi. And as only David Train can do, he started doing a dance in the middle of Mir Yeshiva, and he hugged this guy and he kissed him, and this guy doesn't know what in the world he's doing. He said, what's going on? He says, I got your Gemara. And of course, the guy, before he even opened the Gemara, he got his Gemara back. Now listen to this. You won't believe this. You know, in Ney Yisrael in Baltimore, there was a tremendous tzaddik, Rabbi David Krohn, Zecher Tzaddik Levracha. He was the mashgiach for 25 years. His daughter is Rebbetzin Isby, who doesn't live far from here. So, Rabbi David Krohn was in Ney Yisrael, and there was a principal who told me this story. His name was Rabbi Yosef Wolk, W-O-L-K. And one day, he knew that Rabbi David Krohn had learned in Mir in Europe and was a close Talmud of Rabbi Yerucham. And he said to him, do you by any chance have the Das Chochma Musar of Rabbi Yerucham? Would I be able to borrow it for a day? The Das Chochma, yeah, Das Chochma Musar. So Rabbi David Krohn says to him, yeah, I have one, but I have tremendous sentimental connection to it. So please be very careful with it. So he says, oh, really? Why? Why is it so special? I know it was your Rebbe's Sefer. You know, your Rebbe wrote it. He said, I'll tell you what happened. He said, after the war, when the Nazis were defeated, American officials went around to where all the Nazis were storing stuff. And they had stored many, many Svarim and many Yiddish books. And the American officials brought it to America, and they started sending the Svarim to various yeshivas. And Rabbi Wolk says, I remember when Chaim Berlin got a whole box of these Svarim, and Rav Hutner saw the Svarim that came from Europe, and he was crying. He couldn't believe that they had been saved. He said, but then they sent Svarim to Ney Yisrael because that was a big yeshiva. And Rav Ruderman was the one, of course he was a Rosh Yeshiva, so he had this big carton of Svarim that was sent to him. And he called him Rabbi David Krohn. And he said, listen, I came to America in 1931 before the war. But you went through the war. You learned in Mir. You suffered everything. So any sefer that you want in this carton, take it. It's yours. You deserve it because you went through the war. I didn't. So Rabbi David said, okay, fine. Let me see what's in there. And he opens up. And the first sefer he opens up is Rabbi Yerucham's sefer of Das Chochma Musar. And he could not believe it. His Rebbe's sefer. And he just kissed it. He couldn't believe that his Rebbe's sefer that had been printed just a few months before the war. And then he opened it up, and he almost collapsed. He opened it up, and he saw his name with his handwriting. It was his sefer that had come back to Baltimore. Now, could you orchestrate anything like that? Only Hashem could orchestrate something like that. That's what Emunah is all about. When you hear stories like that, just absolutely incredible. Now, I know it's late and there's some guys here to daven my ear, so I just want to end just with this thing. We'll skip the review tonight, and I just want to end just with this great word from Rav Moshe, an adorable story, and it'll put us all in a great mood, and then we'll see how we can all do tshuva. In this past week's Parshas Matos, Rav Moshe asked a Gavaldik Kasha. It says that when the soldiers came back from fighting against Midian, he was going to teach them how to be toivel the kalim and how to be machshir the kalim that were tamei, because the goyim owned them, all these vessels and all the kalim. And then the pasuk says, "Zois chukas haTorah asher tziva Hashem es Moshe." This is the decree, the chukas haTorah asher that David commanded Moshe. So Rav Moshe asked in Dorish Moshe and Parshas Matos, you could look it up, Perik Lamed Aleph Pasuk Chaf Aleph. What's the Zois chukas haTorah? When you say Zois chukas haTorah, this is like a law, that's applicable to everybody and everything. But what's it got to do with over here? You know, you're talking about kasher and kalim. Zok the Heilige Rab Moshe. There's a great lesson here that no matter what impurity is in your heart, it can be purged, it can be toiveled, it can be brought out. That every person should know they can always do tshuva, no matter how far they are, because that's what, just like the kalim can be brought out either through fire or through water. However they got the tumah, you get it out. That's Zeischukas HaTorah. Don't ever, ever give up. Don't let the Yetzer Hara tell you that you're too far gone. There's no such thing. Every keli can be made, can be toiveled and brought back. And every yid can be brought back. So I want to tell you a great story. This story was told to me by my dear friend, Rabbi Baruch Levine. He told it Rosh Hashanah in Detroit many years ago. Rabbi Chatzkel Levenstein was once in a taxi, and there was a secular Israeli driver. Let's call him Chagi. And so Chagi takes a look, you know, Rabbi Chatzkel, a Heilige Yid, and Rabbi Chatzkel was sitting with a Talmud. So he saw that this is a holy-looking Jew. So he decided he's going to tell him a story. He said, Rabbi, I got to tell you a story. He says, you know, I was in the Israeli army, and my friends, after we finished a tour of duty, so we went to South Africa. We went to Africa, you know, on safari or whatever. And a whole bunch of guys went. And they told us it was safe. You know, we would have no problem. We could go out in the forest. He said, one afternoon, one of my friends went out just to investigate a little bit. All of a sudden, we hear him yelling and screaming. And we all ran towards him. And we see that a big boa constrictor, that's a huge snake, wrapped itself around him and was crushing him. And he was screaming. He was going to get crushed to death. And we started throwing rocks at that boa constrictor, and we took branches from trees and we hit it, and nothing helped. The guy was going to die. So one of the soldiers said, say Shema Yisrael. Say Shema Yisrael. And the guy started yelling, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And just as he said that, the boa constrictor loosened his grip, and he slithered off the guy, and he just walked away, the snake. And this guy was saved. He was on the verge of death. So Rabbi Chatzkel asked Chagi. He said, so what happened to the guy? He said, what happened? The next day, he put on tefillin. He started becoming an Elach Yid. And today he's learning Torah, and his children are religious, and his wife is religious. So Rabbi Chatzkel said, but what about you? He said, Rebbe, the snake wasn't wrapped around me. Right? What kind of teretz is that? Of course, that's what the Yetzer Hara tells you. Didn't affect me. Right? The guy saw an open miracle, and it changed the guy who it happened to, but the guy saw the miracle. It should have changed. But you know something? In COVID, none of us can say it didn't affect us. It affected every single one of us. Financially, emotionally, socially, every way. No Yid was not affected by COVID in some way or another. We can't say the snake wasn't wrapped around us. But Baruch Hashem, we're here to talk about it. And you know something? We've got to do tshuva. And this is the final pasuk that we're going to mention tonight. In Perek Kuf Yutes pasuk Pei Vav, it tells us, Kol mitzvaysecha emunah. Every mitzvah that you do, that shows you emunah b'Hashem. You put on tzitzis because you believe in God. You put on tefillin, you eat kashrus, you daven, whatever you do, you're doing it only because of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's men and women. All of us who have been affected, the snake was wrapped around us. And we got away with it. Baruch Hashem, we're all here to talk about it. But let's remember, we're being tested. We're tested in the good times, tested in the difficult times. Kol mitzvaysecha emunah. And that's what it says in Chavakuk, right? Tzadik b'emunasai yichya. My dear friend Yaakov Solomon once told me, he brought his son Avi to Rav Pam, Zecher Tzadik L'Vrocha, right before Avi's bar mitzvah. And Rav Pam saw that the tefillin bag said, Avram Tzvi. So he said to the little boy who was getting bar mitzvah, do you know what Tzvi stands for? He said, Tzadik b'emunasai yichya. I don't know how many people here are named Tzvi, but Tzadik b'emunasai yitzcha. And you know what occurs to me? Eretz Yisrael is called the Eretz HaTzvi. That's Tzadik b'emunasai yichya. You didn't live with emunah. Tonight, at Irgun Shirei Torah, let's do tshuva. Let's have that emunah, Tzadik b'emunasai yichya. And let's make sure that we elevate ourselves in such a beautiful way that the Eibusher will get rid of all of COVID all around the world. We'll get back to normal, and next year, together with Mashiach, we'll do this in Binyanei Oma. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for listening.
Shem Irgen Shir Torah, Meister Boston. We'd like to give a big yashakayach to Rabbi Krohn for the inspiring drosha. Rabbi say, I know you don't want to hear more about this sponsoring the shiurim, but as Chazal say, as the Apostle says, Hamanti ki adaber. We have to speak about the sponsoring, the Emunah, and the sponsoring from speaking that brings the Emunah. So Irgen Shir Torah needs your support. Call Irgen Shir Torah at 718-851-8651 to sponsor a share, or email tapecenter@yeshivanet.com. We'd like to give a big yashakayach to the sponsor of tonight's share, Be'elam Shem, as a chus v'atzlocha. We'd like to give a big yashakayach to all the supporters of tonight's share, Hershchaim Mulagel, the Nishmas, Rabbi Lezer Bar Moshe, Alav Shalom, and the Goodman and Newfield families of the Nishmas, Gittel Basher Moshe, Alav Shalom, Rameir Stark, the Nishmas Over, Rishol Bar Rameir, Alav Shalom. Ashiyata to everyone for coming and joining in. Rochananya ben Akashem, Rotzakadish Bochel Zakis, Yisrael Fika, Hebron Ter Mitzvah Shanem Al, and Echofes, the Mansidka, Yagdol Ter V'Yadir.